Every great disaster has a moment of birth, a spark of genius that feels brilliant right up until it's not. Today, we're dissecting 10 of those sparks. These aren't just accidents. They're blueprints for failure, designed by people who were absolutely sure they were right. A necessary reality check. The stories you're about to see are cautionary tales with real, fatal outcomes. This is a masterclass in what not to do. 1. The legend of the Jato Rocket Car is perhaps the holy grail of Darwin Awards lore. A story so perfectly, beautifully, and explosively stupid, it feels more like a modern American myth than a real event. Our hero is a man who embodied the spirit of bigger, faster, more. He was a former Air Force sergeant living in the Arizona desert, a man who had seen the awesome power of military technology and thought, "I want some of that for my car." His vehicle was a classic 1967 Chevy Impala, a beautiful but, in his eyes, tragically slow piece of machinery. His solution was not a bigger engine or a turbocharger. His solution was a Jato unit, a jet-assisted takeoff rocket designed to help monstrously heavy military cargo planes get off the ground from short runways. To the military, it's a tool of logistics. To our hero, it was the ultimate performance upgrade. He managed to acquire one, strapped it to the roof of his Impala, with the kind of confident engineering you only see from someone who is about to make a huge mistake, and drove out into the vast, empty desert. He found a long, straight stretch of asphalt that seemed to go on forever, the perfect runway for his grand experiment. He accelerated the car to about 100 miles per hour under its own power, took a deep, final breath of non-recirculated air, and flipped the switch to ignite the rocket. The result was not an acceleration, it was a teleportation. The Jato unit fired with the force of 1,000 angry gods, instantly pinning him to his seat and turning his classic American sedan into a low-altitude cruise missile. The sheer thrust was so immense that the tires, unable to handle the friction and speed, didn't just pop, they vaporized, melting off the rims and leaving two perfect black, glassy stripes seared into the surface of the road. He was now traveling at an estimated 560 kilometers per hour, a screaming metal blur with absolutely no way to control his destiny. The brakes, having been subjected to temperatures they were never designed for, had melted into a useless, glowing slag. The steering was just a suggestion the car was no longer listening to. For about a kilometer, he was the fastest man on four wheels, a land speed record holder with no audience and no future. His record-breaking run came to an end when the road presented a gentle curve. But at that speed, a gentle curve is a launch ramp. The car became airborne, soaring silently through the desert air for a moment before slamming, nose first, into the side of a massive cliff face, about 40 meters up. The impact left nothing behind but a deep, blackened crater in the rock and a legend for the ages. When state troopers eventually found the crash site, they were utterly baffled, unable to comprehend how a car could possibly embed itself so high up a sheer cliff, leaving no skid marks, only the mysterious, melted tracks far behind. It was the perfect and most permanent lesson in basic physics. 2. The amateur lumberjack who saw the tree but missed the forest, literally, is a cautionary tale that proves sometimes the most dangerous thing in the woods isn't a bear or a snake. It's a man with a chainsaw and a severe case of tunnel vision. Our story takes place in the quiet, dense woods of Pennsylvania. Our protagonist, a man who believed in the self-reliant, do-it-yourself spirit, decided it was time to clear a large old tree from his property. This wasn't just any tree, it was a massive oak, a true giant of the forest. He looked at it, saw the challenge, and with his trusty chainsaw in hand, he was ready for battle. He was so focused on this one single tree, so consumed by the task of felling it, that he failed to notice a critical detail about its surroundings. His target wasn't standing alone. Over the years, several other large, dead trees had fallen and come to rest against its massive trunk, leaning on it for support like a group of skeletal, wooden zombies. The forest was a complex, interconnected web of weight and tension, but all he saw was one tree that needed to come down. He fired up his chainsaw, the roar echoing through the peaceful woods, and began to cut. He was a man at work, focused, determined, the smell of sawdust and gasoline filling the air. He made his wedge cut, planned his line of fall, and then began the final back cut. He was so engrossed in the satisfying bite of the chain tearing through the wood that he never once glanced up to reevaluate the situation. The dead trees leaning against his target were what lumberjacks call widowmakers, unstable, unpredictable, and incredibly dangerous. But to him, they were just part of the background. With one final, triumphant buzz, the chainsaw sliced through the last remaining fibers of the trunk. He had done it. The mighty oak began to groan, to crack, to lean. But it didn't fall cleanly in the direction he had planned. The immense, combined weight of the dead trees leaning against it acted like a giant, chaotic battering ram. The entire tangled mess of timber, a multi-ton catastrophe of wood and gravity, began to fall in a completely unpredictable, twisting direction. Our lumberjack, who had just stepped back to admire his work, looked up in horror. He tried to run, to scramble to safety, but it was too late. The ground shook as the trees came crashing down, and he was found directly under the main trunk of the very oak he had set out to conquer. He had been so focused on taking down one tree that he failed to see the much larger, more complex system he was messing with. He became a permanent part of his own logging operation, a tragic, crushed monument to the dangers of missing the bigger picture. 3. The romantic gesture that went up in a glorious, unscheduled fireball is a story about a man whose love was so grand, so passionate, that it simply could not be contained by normal, non-explosive means. We're in Kansas, where a young man, let's call him Cody, was about to propose to his high school sweetheart. This wasn't going to be some simple, on-one-knee proposal. No, Cody was a showman. He wanted a moment so memorable, so incredibly romantic, it would be told at their anniversary parties for the next 50 years. His plan was a multi-stage masterpiece of grand gestures. First, he arranged for a small airplane to fly over a scenic park at a precise time, pulling a giant banner that read, "Shannon, will you marry me?" It was epic, it was cinematic, but it wasn't enough. For the grand finale, as the plane flew overhead, Cody himself would personally light a series of celebratory fireworks, creating a dazzling, ground-based pyrotechnics show to seal the deal. To achieve this, he positioned his pickup truck in the middle of the field, its bed serving as his personal launch pad. He carefully arranged the fireworks, a mix of mortars, rockets, and fountains, ready for their big moment. And right next to this impressive arsenal, he placed the large, open cardboard box containing all the other fireworks. The day arrived. The timing was perfect. Shannon was there, the sun was setting, and in the distance, they could hear the faint drone of the approaching airplane. Cody, his heart pounding with love and excitement, stood in the bed of his truck, a long-handled lighter in his hand, ready to unleash his symphony of light. As the plane came into view, the banner unfurling beautifully behind it, he began his show. He lit the first firework. Whoosh! A shower of gold sparks shot into the sky. He lit another. Crackle! Pop! A fountain of glittering silver. He was a master pyrotechnician, a conductor of celebratory explosions. He reached for his next firework, the lighter still lit in his hand. And that's when a single, traitorous spark, a tiny, almost invisible ember, drifted from the lighter and floated gently down, landing with impossible, heartbreaking precision directly inside the open box filled with the rest of his high-powered fireworks. For a split second, nothing happened. And then, the entire box erupted. It wasn't a show, it was a detonation. A massive, uncontrolled, chain reaction explosion of every single firework he owned, all going off at once, right at his feet. The romantic gesture instantly transformed into an unplanned, chaotic, and very personal pyrotechnics display. Cody was engulfed in a massive swirling ball of fire, sparks, and whistling rockets. The proposal was, in a way, unforgettable. The plane flew overhead with its romantic question, while below, a tragedy unfolded in a series of spectacular, multicolored explosions. He had wanted to create a moment of pure magic, but ended up creating a very different kind of spectacle, one that ensured his bride-to-be would never forget the day he proposed, for all the wrong reasons. 4. The man who brought a baseball bat to a bee fight is a timeless story of territorial warfare, a cautionary tale that proves when you declare war on thousands of tiny flying insects, you'd better have an exit strategy. Our story unfolds in the peaceful backyard of a home in Oklahoma. But for the homeowner, it was not peaceful. It was a war zone. A massive, buzzing beehive the size of a basketball hung menacingly from the branch of a large tree. To our hero, this wasn't a marvel of nature. It was an enemy fortress, an occupying army that had to be driven from his land. He was not a man to call an exterminator or a beekeeper. That was a sign of weakness. He was going to handle this problem himself, with good old-fashioned American ingenuity and brute force. His weapon of choice? Not bug spray, not smoke. His weapon was a Louisville Slugger, a heavy wooden baseball bat. His plan was as simple as it was breathtakingly idiotic. He was going to walk up to the hive and smash it to pieces like a piñata at a birthday party from hell. He approached the tree, his knuckles white as he gripped the bat, his jaw set in a look of grim determination. He took a few practice swings, probably feeling like a legendary slugger stepping up to the plate in the World Series. He took a deep breath, and with a mighty, two-handed swing that would have made Babe Ruth proud, he connected with the hive. The impact was spectacular. The hive exploded in a shower of wax, honey, and very, very angry bees. For a split second, he probably felt a surge of victory. He had destroyed their home. He had won. But his victory was short-lived. From the wreckage of their colony, a living, buzzing cloud of pure, unadulterated rage erupted. Thousands of bees, their home shattered, their queen possibly threatened, swarmed into the air with one single unified purpose: to destroy the monster who had attacked them. He was instantly enveloped, a walking, screaming target in a vortex of stingers and fury. The buzzing was probably deafening. Panic, a feeling he hadn't planned for, took over. He dropped the bat and tried to run, flailing his arms wildly, but it was useless. In his blind terror, he tripped over a root and fell to the ground, landing directly underneath the shattered remains of the hive. His fall was the worst possible thing he could have done. It gave the swarm perfect, stationary access to every inch of his body. They covered him, delivering hundreds, if not thousands, of stings. He had successfully taken down the beehive. He had won the battle. But the hive, in its final dying act, had decisively won the war. He had wanted to reclaim his backyard, but ended up losing his place in the gene pool, a victim of his own stunningly poor pest control strategy. 5. The hide-and-seek champion of 2008, whose final hiding spot was a little too good, is a tragicomedy that serves as a powerful lesson in the importance of knowing your own dimensions. Our story unfolds in a quiet suburban home in Washington state. Our protagonist, a man who clearly believed he was the king of practical jokes, decided he was going to pull off the ultimate prank on his wife. His plan was simple, yet ambitious. He was going to scare the living daylights out of her by hiding in the laundry chute. For those who grew up in older, multi-story houses, you know what this is. A narrow metal tube that runs from the upstairs bathroom down to the laundry room in the basement. A gravity-powered delivery system for dirty clothes. To our hero, it wasn't just a convenience, it was the perfect hiding spot. He probably imagined the scene with glee. His wife, home from work, would hear a strange scratching sound from the walls. Then, as she put a load of laundry in, he would jump out with a mighty boo, giving her a story to tell her friends for years. It was going to be hilarious. So while his wife was out, he put his brilliant plan into action. He went to the second-floor bathroom, opened the small door to the laundry chute, and prepared for his descent. He probably didn't even hesitate, a giddy, childlike excitement fueling his terrible idea. He sat on the edge and launched himself into the narrow, dark tube, expecting a quick, fun slide down to the basement. But he had made a critical and fatal miscalculation. He had the slender, athletic build of a man who spends his weekends on the couch, not the wiry frame of a professional chimney sweep. As he slid down, he hit a narrow bend in the pipe, probably an elbow joint designed to navigate around the house's internal structure. And he got stuck. Not just a little bit stuck, he was wedged in tight, like a cork in a bottle. His initial amusement probably turned to annoyance, then to a dawning claustrophobic horror. He was trapped in a dark, vertical metal coffin, unable to move up or down. But the real danger wasn't just being stuck. The way he was positioned, with his body compressed in the tight bend. put an immense amount of pressure on his diaphragm, making it impossible for him to take a full breath. Every shallow, panicked gasp became harder than the last. He was being slowly, silently, asphyxiated by his own brilliant prank. His wife came home a few hours later, probably wondering where he was. She went about her evening, completely unaware that her husband was just a few feet away, trapped inside the walls of their own home. It was only when she went to do a load of laundry that she noticed the chute was blocked. She found him later, after a frantic search, a tragic, silent testament to a joke that had gone horribly, horribly wrong. The prank had worked in a way. She was, without a doubt, absolutely terrified. 6. The Great Hornet Offensive that chose the wrong target is a masterpiece of petty revenge, a story that proves when you try to weaponize nature, nature often has its own ideas about who the real enemy is. Our story is about a man who had a noisy neighbor problem. We've all been there, the loud music, the late-night parties, the barking dog. But our hero wasn't the type to knock on the door or call the police. His approach to conflict resolution was more biological. He decided he was going to deliver a package to his neighbor, a very special, very angry package. His weapon of choice? A large, thriving hornet's nest. He had found one in his own yard, a buzzing, papery orb of pure, concentrated fury. And a brilliant, terrible idea was born. He was going to carefully transport this nest to his neighbor's front door and shove it through the mail slot. It was the perfect, anonymous revenge. His neighbor would come home to a house filled with thousands of angry, stinging insects. It was a plan of beautiful, diabolical simplicity. So, one evening, he put his plan into motion. He probably wore a ridiculous amount of protective gear, looking like a low-budget beekeeper. He carefully, painstakingly, detached the nest from the tree, a buzzing, vibrating ball of imminent doom in his hands. He crept across the lawn to his neighbor's house, his heart pounding with the thrill of his own evil genius. He got to the front door and located his target, the narrow metal mail slot. Now came the tricky part. He had to shove a large, fragile paper nest filled with furious hornets through a small, unforgiving opening. He positioned the nest and began to push. But the nest, being a delicate paper structure, didn't just slide through. It broke apart. It crumbled in his hands, right there on his neighbor's front porch. And suddenly, he was standing in the middle of a swirling, deafeningly loud cloud of thousands of enraged hornets. They were free, they were confused, and they were very, very angry. And in that moment, finding themselves trapped in a small, enclosed entryway, they didn't fly off to find the neighbor inside. They chose the most immediate, most deserving, and most panicked target available, their aggressor. Our hero was instantly covered, a screaming, flailing epicenter in a storm of stingers. He had wanted to unleash a plague upon his neighbor, but instead, he had unleashed it upon himself. His brilliant plan for revenge had backfired in the most painful and ironic way possible. He had tried to use nature as a weapon, and nature, in its infinite buzzing wisdom, had correctly identified him as the true villain of the story. 7. The samurai sword argument that made a very sharp point is a story that serves as a powerful and very pointy reminder that some things are not toys, and that winning an argument is not worth, well, dying for. Our scene is a messy college apartment late at night. Our hero and his roommate are in the middle of a drunken, rambling argument about something incredibly stupid, as most late-night college arguments are. Maybe it was about who finished the milk, or whose turn it was to do the dishes. Whatever it was getting heated. At some point, the argument turned to the topic of bravery and fear. Our hero, his judgment clouded by cheap beer and youthful ego, decided he needed to make a grand, irrefutable statement to prove his own fearlessness. He looked around the room for a prop, and his eyes landed on the crown jewel of their apartment's decor, a decorative but very real samurai sword hanging on the wall. He stumbled over, grabbed the katana from its sheath, and held it aloft. "You think I'm scared?" he probably slurred. "I'm not scared of anything." His roommate, probably a bit nervous now, told him to put the sword down. But this only encouraged him. He decided he would demonstrate just how harmless this decorative object was. "It's not even sharp," he declared, a statement he had absolutely no evidence to support. To prove his point, He did something that will forever be enshrined in the Hall of Fame of bad ideas. He took the gleaming, razor-sharp tip of the katana, placed it directly against the center of his own chest, and with a triumphant drunken cry of, "See!" he dramatically and forcefully leaned forward onto the blade. He probably expected the tip to just press harmlessly against his sternum, proving his point. He had critically and fatally underestimated either the sharpness of the blade or the relatively small amount of force required to puncture the human torso. The sword didn't just press against him. It slid into his chest with sickening ease. The triumphant look on his face was probably instantly replaced by one of profound, shocking, and very final surprise. The argument was over. He had won, in a way. He had proven that he wasn't afraid. He had also proven that the sword was, in fact, very sharp. His roommate was left standing in stunned silence, the victor of a debate he never wanted to win. It's a grim reminder that when you're trying to prove a point, it's generally best not to use your own vital organs as evidence. 8. The Man Who Tried to Outdrink a Snakebite is a story that sounds like a tall tale a grizzled old bartender would tell you. A legend of toxic bravado and profoundly flawed medical theories. Our scene is a rural village in Brazil. Our hero, a man who probably wrestled crocodiles for fun, was out working in the fields when it happened. He was bitten by a jararaca, one of Brazil's most venomous and feared pit vipers. For any normal person, this is a code red life-or-death emergency. You stay calm, you immobilize the limb, and you get to a hospital for anti-venom as fast as humanly possible. But our hero was not a normal person. He looked at the 2 small puncture wounds on his leg, looked at the snake slithering away, and instead of feeling fear, he felt anger. And then, he had an idea. A brilliant, alcohol-soaked idea. He refused all offers of help. He wasn't going to a hospital, he was going to a bar. But first, he had to take care of some business. He hunted down the snake that bit him, captured it, and put it in a bottle. He then strode into the local tavern, slammed the bottle with the very angry, very venomous snake onto the bar, and ordered a glass of cachaça, a potent Brazilian rum. As the other patrons stared in disbelief, he began to drink. Heavily. He boasted to everyone who would listen that he didn't need a doctor. He had his own cure. The alcohol, he claimed, would neutralize the venom. He would simply get so drunk that the poison wouldn't be able to affect him. It was a bold, if completely insane, medical hypothesis. For about an hour, he was the king of the bar. He drank, he laughed, he showed off the snake that had dared to challenge him. But then, the venom, which had been patiently working its way through his system, began to win the war against the rum. His speech started to slur, not just from the alcohol. His vision blurred. He started to feel a creeping paralysis. The crowd's amusement turned to horror as he began to have violent convulsions, his body thrashing on the floor of the bar. In his final spastic moments, as his body was shutting down, he was consumed by one last primal urge: revenge. He managed to grab the bottle, open it, and as the snake's head emerged, he lunged forward and bit the snake back. It was his final, defiant, and utterly pointless act. He died minutes later, a victim of his own arrogance and a complete misunderstanding of how both venom and alcohol work. The snake, presumably, was left with a very confusing story to tell its snake friends. 9. The gasoline-powered de-icer and the human torch is a story that comes from the heart of a brutal Canadian winter. A cautionary tale about a man who faced a minor inconvenience and decided to solve it with a solution that was pure, unadulterated fire. Our protagonist woke up one morning to find his car sealed shut by a thick layer of ice. The door lock was completely frozen solid. It was a common problem, one that usually required a can of de-icer spray and a few minutes of patience. But our hero was not a patient man. He needed to get to work, and he needed to get to work now. He decided that the slow chemical approach was for lesser men. He needed a faster, more direct solution. He needed fire. He went to his garage and came back with a can of gasoline and a lighter. His logic was a thing of simple, terrifying beauty. He would pour a tiny bit of gasoline on the frozen lock, and the flame would instantly melt the ice. It was a high-speed, high-temperature solution to a low-temperature problem. he carefully dribbled a small amount of gasoline onto the car door, aiming for the lock. But in the freezing cold, his hands were clumsy. A small, seemingly insignificant amount of gasoline spilled from the can and soaked into the sleeve of his thick, synthetic winter jacket. He didn't even notice. He was focused on the mission. He stepped back, took out his lighter, and with a confident flick, he sparked it to life. The gasoline fumes around the lock ignited instantly in a satisfying whoosh. But that wasn't the only thing that ignited. The flame, hungry for more fuel, leaped from the car door to his gasoline-soaked sleeve. In an instant, his entire arm was engulfed in flames. The synthetic material of his winter jacket, which was essentially a wearable plastic bag, didn't just burn. It melted, sticking to his skin and fueling the fire. Panic, a feeling far more intense than his initial impatience, took over. He started to scream and run around in circles, a human torch in the middle of a snowy landscape. But running only fanned the flames, making them burn hotter, faster. His attempt to thaw a tiny frozen lock had resulted in a full-body conflagration. He had wanted to get into his car, but ended up creating a blazing pyre from which there was no escape. His car remained locked, a silent, frozen witness to a man who had tried to fight ice with fire, and had lost in the most spectacular way possible. 10. The virtual reality flight that had a very real landing is a story that marks a new, terrifying frontier in the world of human error. A place where the line between the digital world and the real one becomes so blurred, it simply disappears. Our story takes place in a high-rise apartment building in South Korea. Our protagonist is a man who was not just a gamer. He was a pioneer, an early adopter of the then-new technology of virtual reality. He had a top-of-the-line headset, powerful headphones, the whole setup. When he put on that headset, he wasn't in his small apartment anymore. He was in another universe. The game he was playing was a fantasy epic, a world of magic, monsters, and most importantly for our story, the ability to fly. The game's VR system was incredibly immersive. It perfectly simulated the feeling of soaring through the clouds, of swooping down into valleys, of feeling the wind rush past you. For our player, this wasn't just a game. It was an experience so real, so all-consuming, that his brain began to accept it as reality. He became so deeply immersed, so completely lost in the digital world, that he forgot where the game ended and his living room began. He had been playing for hours, his senses completely dominated by the virtual world. In the game, he was standing on the edge of a high cliff preparing to take flight. He could see the beautiful, pixelated landscape stretching out before him. He could feel the virtual wind. He could hear the epic, soaring soundtrack in his headphones. In the real world, he was standing in the middle of his living room, just a few feet away from his large, open apartment window. His brain, now completely rewired by the immersive experience, saw the open window not as a window, but as the sky. It saw the city lights far below, not as a danger, but as the beautiful world he was about to explore. He decided to fly. He took a running start across his living room, his body mimicking the actions of his in-game avatar, and with a triumphant leap of faith, he jumped. Not in the game, in real life. He jumped, with full force and conviction, directly through the open window of his high-rise apartment. For a brief, terrifying moment, he was actually flying, just like in the game. But the laws of virtual reality do not apply in the real world. Gravity, a feature that was apparently disabled in his game, logged back on with a vengeance. His flight was tragically and brutally short. He had become so immersed in his digital escape that he had forgotten the most basic rule of the physical world: you can't fly. He had achieved a level of immersion that game developers can only dream of. But in doing so, he had found the ultimate and most permanent way to log out. So, the evidence is in. What's the ultimate sin that leads to a Darwin Award? Is it pure arrogance? Is it creative laziness? Or is it just being cheap? Pick a story from today's list and tell me which deadly sin was the true culprit. The debate starts now. If you appreciate a well-documented failure, hit like. Subscribe for your regular dose of reality checks.